Good afternoon from Texas and Colorado. I'm here with the great Erik Vogt, solutions architect extraordinaire. For those people that don't know you Erik, why don't you give us a quick introduction so people know why we're doing this interview?
Yeah, sure. Hi, it's great to be here. Definitely looking forward to this conversation. I've been in the local industry since the late 90s and almost entirely focused on solving problems, mainly for big, complicated enterprise level customers. And in those big, complicated enterprise level customers, there's many of the factors that we're calling LangOps have been permeating for years. Like you think about how these systems, these complex systems work together. Um, I think that's been a passion of mine. So I've also, you mentioned solution architecture. I theoretically, I think solutions architecture was a title before I discovered it. But when we first started out in the industry, we were calling it an analyst or some kind of senior engineer or some kind of troubleshooter type thing. But I really see it as a manifestation of combining business decisions with technical issues, and then of course the linguistics at the foundation of our industry. And I solve problems that way. So that's my definition of solutions and what I'm passionate about.
Perfect. You just described exactly why I felt so strongly about talking to you about LangOps a little bit and about systems thinking API, first design, and the end of localization silos. So those are going to be some of the topics that I'm going to be grilling you on this afternoon. Let's talk a little bit about the tech stack and the evolution of the tech stack, how it's changing with LangOps from engineering to maybe a little bit more orchestration. Um, to your knowledge, what are the foundational principles? How do you balance build versus buy, and what can guide you when architecting and a LangOps tech stack for scalability and agility, you think?
Yeah. So I think the this has always been a problem. I mean, interestingly, when I got started in the 90s, we were already starting to implement Trados, but there were similar Trados-like products that were like starting to percolate around there. We have an industry that fundamentally deals with complexity, and it has all along. We have one aspect, which is the technical stack. You have a path from a content creator or some kind of developer who moves things along and creates a place for the translations to live. And we send it out to translators. And now you multiply that out by a horizontal layer of n number of languages that you're dealing with. And then on top of that, you have another dimension, which represents the different additional capabilities that are layered on to this stack. So now you're dealing with three dimensions at least. And I can argue you talk about four and five, where there's a fundamental cost reduction layer. So translation memory is just at its principle a way of solving a reuse problem to not translate things the same way over and over again. But you also have automation that supports the distribution of these tasks. Now you have updates as well. You have multiple systems. You have software, you have firmware, you have help systems, you have web content. And each of these things needs to somehow harmonize for your customer experience. So now you've got this whole ecosystem of complexity that you're dealing with. And then we are creative in this industry, and there's a lot of products out there that are really cool. They do a lot of standalone things. So now you're dealing on top of all this other stuff, you're dealing with a new layer of, hey, I want to add quality, I want to add a quality estimation. How can I use that? Or I want to use AI. How do I use that? I think each of these layers just adds even more and more complexity to it. So getting to the buy versus build thing, I have not forgotten the question. I'm working up to that.
That
The
was a
buy,
loaded question that I lobbed you right from the get-go. So we could probably go for 10 minutes on this one. Don't hold back. Go ahead.
no, I think you're right about this. The challenge is, I think that you have different entities that are involved. And those entities can be internal systems within a large corporation. They can also be entities within the service layer, so the LSPs of the world, translators, and then you have the tech facilitators in between. There's kind of a control issue about all that stuff. So you find that at the very beginning of a localization journey, it's easier just to outsource everything. Just hand off your source files. LSP takes care of everything. You hand things back. Simple. Then you move to, okay, now I've got to scale up. Now I want to switch vendors, or now I want a multi-vendor strategy. Now you have to start figuring out how you're going to distribute the work, balance things out, do competitive bidding. You've got RFP processes that you need to synchronize on. And now you also have the complexity of the the tendency for largest organizations to say, you know what, I don't really want to buy somebody else's technology. I want to build my own because I've got my own infosec concerns. I've got my own ecosystem to worry about. And as I've seen these things grow, it's a bit like a moving target in our industry because some customers might build something themselves and then they say, screw this, we have to go buy something professional that can handle this. And then you have things going the other way around. Like, we don't want to spend money on this stuff anymore. We want to bring it in-house and control it. So you have this flux environment where all these entities are kind of trying to control things. Another way to look at this too, is and when machine translation came out, there's some value that machine translation adds to the localization process. And at one level, it's the translator is benefiting from it. An individual translator, if they are the ones just tasked with the job, can use MT and accelerate their throughput. And they pay for the MT, they work with the MT, and they pocket all the value of the MT. All right, well, not to miss out, the LSPs want to take a cut of that as well. So they might employ MT to get as much value as they can out of the stack, at which point they're technically cutting into the translator's value on the MT contribution of the equation. But in doing so, they might be, say, training an MT or doing something that adds considerable value to the stack. And then, of course, the client is grabbing a piece of that value stack as well. And then there's sometimes multiple layers. Like, as we know, there's sometimes there can be a little bit of a shell game going on where big entities hire smaller entities who then hire smaller entities who then hire the end worker at the bottom of at the end of the line. But from LangOps perspective, I think what this really boils down to is, how can you eliminate as much friction from this complex ecosystem as possible to amplify the value of that worker who is doing a review or doing a translation or creating content or interpreting how whether this AI output is correct or not. This is a primary producer in our ecosystem. And then on the other end, you have some creator somewhere who says, or some intent, like, I want something. I want to reach this audience. I want to release this product in this country. I want to get access to the revenue from this ad stream from this demographic. So all these things in LangOps, I think, is a set of principles that drives through these 2 points, from one point of an intent and another point of a producer. And how do you deal with all these 4 to 5 dimensions of complexity in here to cut out the stuff that isn't adding value, and how to get to the stuff that is adding value? And so I think in this kind of ecosystem, this is pretty central to my worldview as well, is that you really have to understand the fundamentals to be
Yeah.
able to recognize value when you see it, and to be rational about how you're cutting through this complexity to deliver the right value.
Yeah. And what decisions should you consider, you think, when selecting components for your localization, for the modern localization infrastructure? Is there anything that's changing in those decisions in a new LangOps environment?
Well, it depends on who you talk to.
Mm.
Personally, I'd like to live in an interoperable world. So components can be bought, and the value of each of those components can be recognized as a standalone Lego. So if you have say, a task distribution system, you can operate that and also, let's say, a multimedia dubbing ecosystem or something. So you want the task distribution system to be separate and but compatible with the task system itself. So you think about a container. I've always visualized this as kind of the holy grail, is that you have a container that can deliver a task to the right person, and that container stays stable, but you change the task depending on the need. Meanwhile, the task could be a media editing environment. It could be an AI editing tool. It can be a MT engine. It could be anything. It could be a content creation portal. All those things, this interoperability would allow that to happen. But the reason why I said it depends on who you ask, every individual entity in our ecosystem wants to get as much control and as much stability in within their span of control as they possibly can. So there's this inherent incentive to not make components interoperable, but to keep them as packaged as possible to retain control over the as much of that ecosystem as possible, and honestly to make it as difficult as possible to move to switch those. So in one way of thinking about it is Lego pieces that you can cleanly understand what their value is and move them around the chessboard however you want, versus the other end of the spectrum is the incentives that everybody has to stay in control of the entire end-to-end solution and to put everything all under one roof, which I mean, I'm framing it in really negative terms, but there's good reasons to put everything under one roof because there's one accountable entity that can be responsible for all the pieces under that hood.
Man, you're talking my language. We're geeking out really, really heavily. I'm so happy we're really going into the detail of this, and you're so knowledgeable about this as well. It's a real pleasure. In what ways can LangOps solutions be designed, do you think, to avoid vendor lock-in while maintaining integration depth?
Well, if you're trying to build a solution that is comprehensive and really reaches all the way upstream to the content creator or the intent, the beginning of the journey, all the way to the producers who are providing that, you have to have a holistic view. That means being honest about where the value is being created in that entire workflow. And then I think you probably need to work with vendors who are willing to participate in a flexible mindset with regards to how you assemble these capabilities. So in this case, and this is where it's tough, where we have in some situations, like I'm with Argos. Argos might say, well, we're the translator provider for this layer, for this part of it, but maybe we're also a technology provider or an integrator for this other customer. So each customer might be a different engagement. And in some cases, you might be partners with your competition. You might be competitors and you might be partners in different contexts for the same kind of part of the market, right? So that gets very complex, right? Where we're like, well, we're partnering on this client A, and on client B, we're competitors. So how do we differentiate these so that we're clear about this? Otherwise, you're just disempowering the entire vendor stack to simply give up the best parts of what they're doing without any control or any flexibility to how they deliver value. So it's complex. It's complex, Stefan.
Yeah. Well, I want to touch, we haven't really talked about AI in 15 minutes or so, and that's remarkable being so techy right out of the gate. A lot of people are trying to fold large language models in their tech stock. What are the biggest architectural challenges you think folding in LLMs in your tech stack nowadays?
Well, yeah, there's a business. I mean, I think some of the challenges are not knowing the business value that you're creating with AI, and it's great to slap an AI label on it, but I'd encourage us to stop using AI whenever you're actually talking about doing something. So, AI is a means to an end, or it's a technological infrastructure, but it's not a thing. There's no thing. There's no like entity that like a person that you're talking to. That having been said, AI can add a lot of value in a lot of different ways. And I think thinking about it in terms of agents that are doing a particular task and narrowing the scope of how you're defining that agent's work is the best approach. So you might assemble then a group of agents that are doing different things depending on how you want to do it. And then you can manage these much better because otherwise it's just too confusing. It's too blurry and fuzzy. So let's say you use one agent to summarize the source content, can do some fantastic, and you optimize that particular agent around that particular purpose of I want to summarize it in this particular way. Then you have a different one that might be focused on glossary, and maybe a different one that's focused on style, and maybe a different one that's tuning up and down to the learning expectations or the complexity of your end user. Like this is something that we often don't even we haven't even started thinking about this, but with AI, and I'm just breaking my own rule here, but you can have agents that will tune up between between kind of a 10th grade level or a nice way to talk to your loving grandmother level to explain a concept, or you can go dive in deep and get to the specifics. And if your content's there, you can deliver the value that that particular personalized expectation is at the end of that value chain. But that whole thing the data needs to be there for that model to be able to generate the content that that end user is looking for.
Yeah, it's a mad dash, it seems like, with everybody trying to integrate some form of large language model or AI in their tech stack. Where do you see in the localization space, where do you see where AI is most appropriate, and where do you think it's not appropriate at all, where people are making a mistake trying to apply it?
Well, I would always go back to where you're creating value. So if you don't understand how you're creating value, then you may not understand how AI is going to add it. So for example, one big area is creating systems that will help translators to be more effective at their job. So you have to always think about them as the hero of this story. They're the heart of the engine. They're the ones who are truth tellers. Those are the ones who we're saying you are accountable for getting this right. How can we make your job easier? If that's your focus, then all your AI, the LLMs need to be relentlessly accountable to that particular outcome. So if it's not adding value to that translator's working environment, then we're making their lives more difficult and we're degrading the purpose of why we're deploying that. However, if you're trying to deploy AI as an enhancement to a very refined sort of, let's say, fixing fixing fuzzy matches or say tuning some translations to be appropriate to a certain set of laws. Like you could say, well, this particular agent is just going to be looking from the standpoint of English law and then reinterpreting this content in the context of French law or something. That, I mean, it's possible. It's in there. But if you're not really relentlessly clear about that, then you end up shoving AI in places where people aren't clear about why it's there. They don't see its benefit. It's confusing. It can also lead to chaos. So if you are working with a TM environment, then you have to stay consistent in that TM environment. You can't add AI that's going to start blasting out all these non alike pairs that now no longer can be used to leverage in the future because they're no longer equivalent. So it's really important to be very clear about the purpose of each of the stations in this workflow and make sure that the AI is adding value that's extremely crisp and extremely focused on the function that AI is using in that particular context.
Yeah, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about systems thinking and localization as well. Can localization evolve beyond the tool silos, so to speak? What do you think are the biggest integration gaps you still see in most enterprise localization ecosystems?
Yeah, I think I alluded to that earlier. I think it's more of a business problem than it is a technical problem because there are systems that are entirely airtight. They have 100% of a system can be under one technological roof, can all be 100% integrated. But if you are in that environment, you're limited to what the capabilities of that environment are, and there's no plug and play. There's no kind of building your own system. So I almost imagine that what we're talking about here is fundamentally different architecture principles from a closed garden model to a openly extensible model. You think about Apple versus Microsoft kind of Apple, you get the product you get. And with a Microsoft, you can buy a PC, you can buy a box, and you can just throw in a bunch of equipment, and everything's designed to be interoperable. So I think LangOps is fundamentally addressing that. Well, it can address both of them. On the closed garden standpoint, you have the advantage of applying LangOps principles in an area where you have complete control. And there's no reason not to think in LangOps terms if you have a closed garden environment. In the other environment, in the open ecosystem, it's a little bit of the Wild West, and you might need to think about who you're allying yourself with and work with entities that have an agreement with regards to the standards that you're agreeing to interoperate with, so that if you were working with a service provider or tech provider that's like, we understand that you want to assemble solutions, we're going to make our system as interoperable as possible, nice, clean, open AIs, flexible thinking with regards to developing new capabilities within those APIs, willingness to work with other partners to integrate capabilities. All these things are really an alliance mindset and let's be honest, these are all temporary alliances, but with those alliances and those willingness to open doors and to cooperate, you end up with win-win opportunities. And then if you have multiplayer environment, you can do it, but it does require some trust. It does require some openness and some willingness to agree to disagree about some boundary conditions on this.
Yeah.
So
Do you think that LangOps can serve as a unifying layer between the different departments like product and marketing and engineering? That's kind of the holy grail, I think. If we could just, it will raise the importance of localization in a way that we've always been wishing for as well. What do you think?
in theory, it's certainly a tempting goal. Uh, when you're thinking product marketing and engineering, I'm visualizing those exact departments with very different needs, right?
Yeah.
Like marketing is their KPI is views, clicks, sales. They're trying to get momentum, and they need to be given information about what the capabilities are of a given system, and they crave that. They want to present that. They want to not get into any trouble offering something that they can't do, but they're really trying to engage emotionally with people to start the customer journey, like awareness over to buying decision and then post buy support. Product, on the other hand, fundamentally is trying to meet a customer need, which is related to marketing, right? And if they're listening to marketing and they've got a good bridge there, then product's going to build things that people actually want. If they're disconnected, product is out there building things on their own because they believe inherently that they've got the secret sauce, the secret magic of the universe, and then marketers just going to have to bolt onto that and do their best to kind of sell whatever the geniuses in product did. Engineering, of course, is not in and of itself that's kind of a system support infrastructure thing. It could mean anything from infosec to transaction management to server capacity. I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. But I would almost say that engineering just needs to listen. So if in a good LangOps ecosystem, you've clearly defined the value that you're trying to create for your end customer. And when I think about this, I sometimes have this just tingle in my spine about when a good product is really hitting it on the nose and exactly like hitting a market need and really synchronized, and all the cylinders of an organization are firing in conjunction. It's a really beautiful thing. So, is LangOps a way to try to harmonize this to help with global strategy, with global marketing strategy. Like to me, if product really understands their customers and the market really understands the product, and the engineering is there to tie all that stuff together through the many, many ways that engineering does, then you have an opportunity to really deliver some exciting value to your end customers in a way that provides the least amount of friction or least amount of tension internally. On the flip side, you can anti-solution this and look for ways you can make this worse. And it's really easy to do because you could just pull these ideas right from personal experience. Product and marketing are never talk to each other. They're completely disconnected and they don't really care about localization at all. The localization is just some afterthought that it's like, we need that, just do it. And there's never any integration of localization principles into either product or marketing. So
Yeah, from my perspective, it seems such a natural evolution, though, that with everything being under one roof, you should have better knowledge about what's going on with your customers, and you should be able to apply it directly into all your different strategies. What do you think a well-designed source of truth looks like in a LangOps enabled organization?
it's all about metadata, I think. You have to understand the infrastructure of the data itself. So again, this kind of there's a bunch of different aspects of this. It goes to the customer too, the customer profile that you're looking for. If you're thinking about a hyper personalization mindset here. You have customers who need a certain kind of support. You need to recognize what their real world experiences are, and you're providing support or products that are oriented towards delivering value for those real people who ultimately, especially for a B2B, B2C environment, which is, I think, where it's most important, where end customers have a experience and they go blasting. If they have a bad user experience, it gets into social media immediately, and it can create a snowball effect that damages your brand in ways that you can't control at all. So or rather, it's very difficult to control, I should say. So the source of truth needs to be all the metadata you need to quickly listen, adapt, configure, modify, adjust to the changing end user requirements. And that's where AI, getting back to AI again, and there's some really interesting ways of doing this. Like you can use AI to listen to social listening to scan, kind of massive amounts of localized content in a variety of different dialects, languages, cultures, and then be able to synthesize all that stuff and provide meaningful, almost real-time feedback to your developers who can immediately start thinking, okay, the problem here is this product is hard-coded into one locale. We're losing a bunch of market share here because we're not thinking about the end users in this particular market. We have to add these capabilities quickly, and marketing plays a role there. It all needs to be a synthesis with the right language in terms of how these different complex systems, the entities within these complex systems work with each other.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about technology so far. We're building for developers, but we shouldn't lose touch with the human beings and the linguists in the loop, so to speak. What do you think is the right balance between automation and human QA and continuous localization flows?
Well, the automation is only good if it's approximating what a good human is going to do. And I think the scale, many of the things we have to watch for are not things that are good use of human time to do. I mean, obviously, spell checking an MT output is pointless. Like you fix it and it just goes back to whatever it was again. Like you have to go back to the source, right? You have to fix it at the source. So it doesn't really make any sense to waste valuable human effort on certain types of tasks, and those are the ones that are best to do with automated quality assurance type of things. I'd love to sort of double click on this for a second, Stefan, because the quality assurance and quality control are two different things.
Yeah,
And there's a kind of a compliance with what your intended output focus is. And then there's the means to get there. And sometimes you think about humans as being the last on the chain. I used to be a carpenter, and one of our jokes that we would say is if the walls are crooked, or if something doesn't look right, we just say, "Don't worry about it. The painter will fix it." And it feels like that's such a good metaphor, right? Because it's like the painter, the localization is the paint, the skin on the outside that's just
yeah,
kind of giving you a different like exterior kind of experience. But if you have that attitude, like our joke, I mean, we did try our best to make straight walls, but it's not possible really to expect translators to fix certain things. It's not reasonable. So that's where this whole architecture thing is so critical. So again, humans where it matters, it's less and less about doing anything that we can automate and more and more about them knowing and understanding the truth. So there's a concept about a brand champion, for example. That's something that a lot of consumer brand companies have experimented with. And the idea is you're not just translating, you're engaging with human beings who know your product in your locale and are emotionally committed as well as sort of appropriately trained, supported, and incented to be a champion for your brand and your market. Now you've got a different mindset. You're not thinking about being a translator. Now you're a social listener. Now you're a support for marketing team. Now you're also thinking about how are your end users using your product different than how it was designed, and you provide that feedback back to product. Like those brand champions can play a pivotal role
yeah.
in enabling a successful deployment in a market. It's you get out of the box of thinking about them as a better translator, and you move them into a strategic role as a champion for success with an understanding of the strategic objectives of this brand in this market, and they're 100% supported in this through the entire ecosystem. And I mean, part of LangOps, and this is really just a broad problem in the complexity that we described earlier. That is a very hard thing to do because you've gone through all these different steps, and my four different dimensions of different variables that are affecting kind of the flow of information in this. That end user is getting some tiny chunk of some tiny, like the translator is getting some tiny chunk of some tiny project, maybe aggregated several different platforms in the same task. It can be really hard for them to plug in if they're doing this kind of broken down thing. So for a system to really benefit from their humanness and their awareness of the broader problem, investing in those humans becomes more important than ever in my mind.
I really like how you're elevating the human value here and its value proposition. It's really eye-opening and refreshing to hear that so much of LangOps is about making linguistics assets first-class citizens in the enterprise system, so to speak. So, in what ways? Can knowledge graphs and ontologies be used to enhance translation quality? We're going a bit more technical with this next question again, but I think there's a real opportunity there for localization to be elevated. What do you think?
It could be in certain contexts. I mean, I think large language models are, extrapolating their own nodes, right? They're figuring out what is related to what. And sometimes that can be hard for it to interpret in certain contexts. So I think what knowledge graphs are is a human-made node structure that associates certain concepts with other certain concepts to help the model understand sort of the relationship between different things. So I think there is, I think those ontologies need to be at a high level, most likely. They tend to improve AI translation quality. I think it also can even be more important for Gen AI, so that Gen AI is a little bit more, uh, their output is harder to define. Well, translation translation, you know that what your output is supposed to equal what your input is. It doesn't address whether the input's any good. It just says the output needs to match the input. With generative AI, you're now completely changing this to say, I want you to create something that's fit for use in this particular context. And at that stage, knowledge graphs and ontologies can be really critical to make sure that the output generated by the model for that particular end user, sometimes on demand at that exact moment that they're asking for it, is informed by the right understanding of the relationship between different entities within your asset group. So I think it is very important, but I'd say it's level 400 stuff when you're already have like some large language model deployment and you want to improve the quality of it. Yeah, it would be an asset in kind of thinking RAG. It's like it's an asset in there, right? It's something that the AI is using as a reference to interpret the context of objects in the semantics of what they're processing for that particular end user.
Yeah, maybe we should roll it back one layer and ask you about, architecting systems that allow language assets to be version shared and reused like code. How would you go about that? Do you have any opinions about that?
Well, tell me more about what you're thinking there. I just want to make sure I'm understanding
Well,
the direction.
I'm just thinking, how can if level if the last question was level 4, if we go one level up, do you have a better idea of how we could make language assets, or how we could architect language assets to be reused, and be optimized in a system that is LangOps oriented?
Okay, so yeah, so I think the relationship between different yeah, I guess we get into complexity again really quickly here, but
Yeah.
if you want a consistent brand experience, you have a certain style layer that's in there that you want to control. So that could be a place where an ontology might be helpful. And that can be pretty subtle, right? I mean, if you're thinking about, let's say, a the consumer brand, a fashion brand or something, it could be as fundamental as really making sure that you're associating the right uh, tops and bottoms when you're recommending outfits. Like it's not a linguistic thing. It could be an actual kind of meta layer in how you see different, you know, different products work interoperating together, or thinking about how you're say something that you assemble, a product that you would assemble. You want to make sure that the pieces that you're suggesting are compatible with other pieces that you've already sold the customer. So, I just bought a new microwave, for example, and if I'm going to go back to that company and I want to buy a replacement for a piece of it, I don't want to have to search through schematics of all the different parts and figure out what I need to buy. I want them to know that I bought this particular model and that this particular exact replacement part is what I need for solving this exact problem. Um, so though that's an example of kind of a non-linguistic one, but the linguistic ones are equally as valid. I think one thing I see in some companies that don't really, especially sprawling empires where there's been a lot of acquisitions, the brand voice is so diluted that each one of it feels like you're dealing with a different company when you do it buy a different product. I think, not to mention any names, but there's some large enterprise giants out there who have acquired so many.
We are getting so spoiled, aren't we? The personalization thing is such a hot topic for me because we really expect that companies know us a lot better than we ever did maybe 5 years ago. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, yeah, and that's interesting. That's a driver, and you only localize. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You have to be faster than the other guy if
Yeah.
you're in a race. And if so, the problem there is an evolving customer expectation for higher personalization and better quality, better responsiveness, uh, quicker solutions, and the customers will abandon you in a heartbeat if you can't meet their ever increasing expectations. There was sort of another joke that a comedian was talking about how somebody was discovered that they could use the internet on an airplane, and you can sort of visualize this person, right, sitting there, and this is the first time they've been on a plane, and they log in, they're like, oh my God, this internet, I've got an internet at 30,000 feet, I'm on the internet, and then it's like, man, this is slow, this sucks. It's like they go from being amazed at a new feature to being disgusted that it doesn't meet their expectations in like less than 5 minutes.
Remember when the internet first started and we had to wait like a minute for a page to load and you'd had to sit there for the graphical images to load on your page? That's unimaginable
Oh
nowadays.
yeah, I still hear the modem like sound in my head. Wake up,
Yeah.
like yeah, yeah.
So, how do you think organizations should think about governance and lifecycle management of linguistic assets? How is that changing nowadays?
Oh, it's a big one because to do it right, you need to understand your stakeholders, aggregate the stakeholder expectations. And governance is all about giving voice to the relevant stakeholders. So you have to understand who they are and bring their voices in. But we also know that humans can dilute things to death by committee kind of thing. So you have to have a visionary who will listen, like a really strong visionary team that will listen and understand, seek to understand, then implement and implement consistently and aggressively. And they have to constantly be listening for new signals while also knowing that sometimes a shift in position can create a lot of noise. So I'll use a kind of HP used to have well, I'm sure they still have it. It's been a while. It's been a long time since I worked with them, but they had an architecture where the user guides would all have variables in them for the things that were variable, like the product name or the model number or the number of pages that the printer could spit out, or how many ounces or milligrams the ink cartridges hold, like all these variables. So they built a really diligent infrastructure, and it took a lot of discipline to build that infrastructure. But in doing so, they were able to cut their costs tremendously because I had people on my team who could write a new user manual just by using other user manuals and adjusting the variables, and you wouldn't even need a writer at all. So I did an analysis at that back then of a 10-year migration between the original human only solution to a full implementation of a content management system, TMs, and all this very disciplined content creation structure, like so the architecture of the source files. They also had single source. They were early leader in this area, so could generate web or print PDFs or help files just by click of the buttons. So just boom, 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 like this content could be repurposed to be put wherever it needs to and could be updated almost instantaneously. And it went from a practical published cost per word of something in the ballpark of 50 cents per word, if you add it all up, down to 2 cents a word, over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of a system that was relentlessly focused on optimization. Every year, they just kept on improving and implementing these layers of efficiency. They were good to not get tempted by every single new idea that came along. They had a steady course, and they knew anything that they were going to do to implement a new sort of idea needed to go through a very careful review. So you're putting all this emphasis on planning for maximum flexibility later. That's kind of a future-proof mindset, is that organize, 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 think, 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 plan, and then anticipate change and anticipate variation and anticipate as much flexibility as you can so that when you're in the midst of it and you're going through new features being added and new capabilities being added, that you're not going to get thrown off by that. So that would be a word of caution for our listeners that be careful what you implement, because there
Mm.
are systems out there that are sound shiny and awesome, but when you actually try to plug them into your existing infrastructure, they can degrade service or add cost and complexity and create a nightmare that nobody wanted. So again, understanding the value gets back to understanding the value proposition at the core of why you're doing it, and make sure anything that you're implementing is very, very focused on a particular value proposition, and only do one at a time.
You're gonna have to indulge me. I I promise you not to throw you any major curveballs, but I'm sitting here listening to you, and you're so knowledgeable about all the new technologies. It's fascinating, and I'm super interested in that stuff. So I'm gonna throw you a little curveball, though, and I want to dip my toe in the water with this. What role do you see for embeddings and vector databases in the next gen language asset management creation? What I'm really interested in is whether you think that there's specific technologies that are being developed right now that you think have huge promise in the future for a LangOps or localization environment, and that maybe not everybody's working on yet.
Yeah, that's one I think is about the LLM architecture and more. I think a lot of LSPs, a lot of the people in the industry aren't there yet in terms of knowing how to make these things matter.
Mhm.
I think it's fundamentally most relevant to generative AI applications, but keeping in mind what I just said about the control, right? When these systems can enhance control and provide better focus, they can add value. They aren't in and of themselves necessarily valuable unless you understand what you're deploying them for. So, I think I think also architecturally at a big picture, we have a few giants out there who are generating the billion-dollar foundation models that everybody is using. So don't don't compete with them. Like don't try to replicate what they're doing. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of engineers at a lot of companies about this, and almost none of them believe that there's anything other than the rare use case where building your own internal LLM and your own architecture is worth it. It's so much better to sort of harness your capabilities onto an existing foundation model and learn how to deploy that extremely well. And I think the embeddings in the vector database like that class of solutions is probably out of reach of a lot of the use cases that we're trying to go for right now. But it would matter if anybody is in using those to enhance the foundation model performance. And that would be the one use case that most matters is how do you get the most value out of those foundation models, given, of course, and I sorry for the endless number of run-on sentences here, but the foundation models are changing every week. Like they're getting
Mhm.
better and better, and they're adding new capabilities. So if you forget what your part of your mission objective is, then you can get lost in all these shiny new things without understanding how that impacts your your exact situation. And if you can't control what's going on, then your system will devolve. It'll get chaotic. It'll get muddled. It'll get confused. And there's we don't want that to happen. And when we're dealing with the amount of complexity that our industry has, we have to be ever more careful than ever to think in terms of solution design, think in terms of kind of LangOps principles, and not forget that these systems at their root still depend on many core things that need to work right, many things that need to be work right for the machine to work.
Yeah, LangOps is very much a mindset to switch from service to infrastructure, I would say, rethinking localization as an operational function, not a service cost center. What shifts in mindset do you think are needed for companies to treat LangOps as critical infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, if you want to think of it through that lens, it always helps to look at the value proposition of the product itself and what access to those markets means. Like what is it doing for you? Like what are you doing the localization for? Like what's the point of it? And I know it sounds really kind of reductionist to go all the way back to that level, to that particular question. But
Hmm.
if you don't remember why you're doing it, you can't keep calibrating things to, you know, to focus on the concept of infrastructure. So, I mean, infrastructure is a set of pipes, right? It's a flow. I like it. Think of it as water flowing through a system. and those pipes need to be there and they need to work. And if you've got a system, you need a source, you need the distribution, and you need somewhere for it to go afterwards. All this entire flow needs to be orchestrated. It needs to be thought through as an entire system. If you can, when you add a new feature, let's say you want to sort of think about a new thing that you want to react to, or new product you're introducing, or new feature you're introducing. If you're aware of that infrastructure and you know how that infrastructure will handle these new variables, and again, metadata can be a very powerful way of mapping all this stuff out,
Yeah.
like mapping out the workflow and mapping out the metadata that's needed for each of those stages, those stations to work at, and thinking about compute and humans as stations also helps as you build out these workflows. Be detailed about it. Think about the metadata, think about the flow, and think about how this whole infrastructure works, and that will get you where you want to go. If you don't think about the infrastructure, that's when you get into a situation where you add a new feature here, usually because some executive insists it's there and doesn't really understand the infrastructure. And then the next thing you know, you've delivered something nonsensical on the output, or created enormous bottlenecks or enormous challenges in your ecosystem that are almost impossible to unpack and can take months to dig yourself out of.
Yeah. Talking about executive teams, much of the talk that we've had for the duration of my localization career is how to get a seat at the C-suite table. How do you advocate for LangOps investment with engineering and executive teams? How do you make that case, you think?
Well, I think an executive has about 15 minutes to pay attention to this. And I think especially for larger, so really having your elevator pitch dialed in is still, it needs to be there. Like you can't really expect them to get into the weeds. And as such, they see an investment and they see a return. And that's really, you need to boil it down to that. So if this, then that. So if you can talk in language of cutting costs by 15% or cutting time to market by, 30%, now you've got their attention. But you have to be able to deliver, and they're going to hold you accountable for that. So be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I mean, often executives
You
are
better have a
support.
good solutions architect on your team if you're gonna make this pitch. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're right. You better be prepared with their questions too, because they sometimes can think about things in completely odd ways. There was an example. We were putting together essentially before LangOps was invented. We were putting together a systematic proposal for a customer that was going to re-architect their entire way of doing business and streamline things, make things better. We had a consultant in there who's a solutions architect who kind of worked directly with key stakeholders, identifying ways that things could be smoothed out and delivering all this value. And then it reached, and we finally got to the presentation with the executive who wasn't briefed in any of this stuff. And we had it was beautiful. It was a beautiful proposal. Like it really, really worked. But he said, well, how do I guarantee that if I spend any money on localization, I'm going to get any return on this? It's like we are a time and materials industry. We can make your time and materials more cost effective, but we can't ourselves understand the core value proposition of whether or not your company is going to deliver more returns without market data or without research or like understanding the market. That's an investment decision that's well above the heads of most of the people in our industry, and yet is front and center for the executives you're talking about. So maybe this is a challenge for our industry, which keeping in mind that many companies don't really want to reveal their strategies. They're not going to share like any of the actual metrics on this.
Yeah.
But can our industry play a role in the social listening to play a more proactive demand generation signal? So if you're talking to, say, a large consumer electronics company, if you go into that conversation with that executive and saying you only have a 13% market share in personal electronics, your competitor is localized and has a 40% market share. These are the things they're doing. We think you can increase your market share from 13 to 40 to meet them if you not only localize up to the same level, but also provide some killer marketing that's tuned to that market, that demographic. Now you've got an opportunity for our industry to play marketeer, market research. We've got an opportunity to do in brand specific creative work to target to help that executive understand how you're going to reach their market. You can synthesize different roles as well. Like you could have content creators who are also social listeners. Can you imagine that? So now you've got somebody in Germany saying, hey, they're using this product in a totally novel way. I'm going to create some content that's going to support them on the fly right now and share it via MT with the other languages, maybe see
Yeah,
whether it picks up. But you've got all those listening channels in there and you can just be tapped right into that market. But we tend to just not take any accountability for the output of what we
yeah,
do. So we
yeah,
do all this work and it's like, well, we get paid for whether it works or not. We don't necessarily want to be accountable for whether it works, right? It's a risk, right? We don't necessarily want that, but maybe we could do more as an industry to look at what that local impact is so we understand our own value better.
it certainly seems to me that with the new technological capabilities, we could make a bigger effort to gather the intelligence to make that kind of argument. And you've made a really compelling argument for this afternoon. I have time for one more question, believe it or not. That's how
Yeah.
quickly we went over the hour. Um, there's a lot of parallels between LangOps and DevOps, and I wanted to know in specific where you see the parallels between LangOps and DevOps and SecOps and DataOps in terms of organizational design.
Well, I think these are all operating principles. They're not hard and fast rules. They're a set of principles, and I think couple of the key principles of DevOps, for example, is continuous improvement. So you don't really think about a product waterfall release where you're building something, you
Mm,
release it, and you're done. It's more of a continuous journey where you're
yeah,
releasing and iterating and improving and reacting, and the software is living. It's a living,
yeah,
breathing thing that people are interacting with and adapting to and evolving from. And the more that if you have that principle in mind as you think about LangOps, it's all you have to think about the flexibility and the livingness of those ecosystems and how they could get more complex or they could devolve, and you have to be prepared for that. You can move to simplicity or complexity, and you know, it just really hits me when you see people building a complex system and then becoming a slave to it. And they just end up relentlessly like having to do all this stuff that you're paying project managers and engineers and linguists to kind of claw through this clunky system that you've built like 5, 10 years ago, and you can't update it because nobody ever thought about ever updating it again.
yeah,
It gets to be kind of a tragic, demoralizing experience for everybody who's involved. And chances
yeah,
are the output isn't relevant anyway. So if you
yeah,
have a DevOps approach and you're thinking about that living, breathing entity of a reacting, moving system that can adapt to changes in the market, can adapt to new technologies like AI, can adapt to new features, or be able to swap out interchangeable parts as much as possible. You can enhance your entire language delivery infrastructure. And let's like language delivery, you're delivering a product with language as dimension, might be a better way of putting it, with more effectiveness. And that's what you're going for ultimately.
awesome. Eric, this was so insightful. I'm not, I haven't been happier doing, even my dog, it comes and joins me here at the last minute. That's how interesting it's been. Thank you so very much, spending an hour with us talking about LangOps and the future of localization. I really appreciate your time and all your insights.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Stefan. Thank you for the time.
You're welcome.